I must confess that I've always feared this moment and the possibility that one day I might have to give a graduation address. For years, I sat among the faculty at Shorter College in Rome, Georgia, and at Judson College in Marion, Alabama, and was forced to listen to some really terrible graduation speeches that I have absolutely no memory of, except that I do recall that most of the jokes were terrible, the content meaningless, and the delivery horrific. Other than that, some of them were pretty good. Now my turn has come, and what I can promise you are some bad jokes and some poor content, but perhaps a short speech today. I will also promise you a dose of humility. I wish, President Olive, that I had brought the grade book from the fall of 1992 so that I could share your president's grades with you today. No, I'm just kidding. He did very well in that course, and it does make me feel old to know you were in a course I taught, I must confess. It may just be me, but it seems to me that humility is in short supply these days. I can't seem to locate much of it. And along with humility, customer service seems to have gone out the window. And perhaps humility and customer service sort of go hand in hand. My calling as a global mission coordinator, as you well might imagine, requires a great deal of international and domestic travel. For example, just this week, I've been in 4 major airports: Atlanta, Dallas, Philadelphia, and Raleigh, all in 1 week. And in that time, I've been on 5 different airplanes. And I want to give you a couple of for instances related to the airline industry this morning. I was on a flight recently in which I had the good fortune to be upgraded from economy class to business class, which is no small thing when you're 6 feet 5 inches tall. As I sat down in business class, I noticed that there were a number of people sitting in business class who obviously worked for the airline on which I was flying. And I was amazed at this reality. Full-paying customers were crammed in the economy section of the plane, while employees of the airline were sitting in the best seats on the plane. I counted airline employees around me, and in a 16-seat business section counted 7 airline employees. I turned to the woman beside me and I said, "What do you think of an airline that puts its customers in the back and its employees in the front in business class?" And she looked at me with an absolutely stunned expression on her face and finally said, "Well, I work for the airline too, and that's just a privilege they give us." So there were 8 airline employees in business class. And one of them did not talk to me for the rest of the flight. I was on a flight from Santiago, Chile to Atlanta recently, and I was particularly frustrated by the lack of legroom on the flight. Something had happened. I got up to stretch, and when I got to the back of the plane, a male flight attendant said, "How's the legroom for you?" "What legroom?" I responded. He smiled, he reached over, he patted my belly, and he said, "You know, as we get older, we tend to take up more space on airplanes." So Delta has an opening for a flight attendant if any of you are interested. I was on a flight from Atlanta to Minneapolis, and I fell asleep, and my blanket came off and fell in the aisle. A flight attendant came along, tapped me on the shoulder, and said, My, someone has dropped his blanket in the middle of the aisle." And I picked it up, and I handed it to him. Whatever happened to good manners and civility? It's not just the airline industry. I witness it all over. We seem to have forgotten the basic rules of common decency about putting others first, giving up the seat on the bus to an older person, saying, "I'm sorry," and taking the blame. Take this whole economic downturn we've all just been through. I've heard all about whose fault it is and why we're in this mess. Economists have explained it. They've pointed out the culprits. We've bailed out banks, even the ones that caused the mess. We've had car makers fly in their private jets to explain why they need bailout money. But I have yet to hear anybody really step up to a microphone and say, "My bad. I caused some of this. My bank, my greed, my desire. I'm sorry. I can't do much about it now, but I at least want you to know that I'm sorry." Politicians are racing for cover. Wall Street firms are trying to give huge bonuses again, even while the rest of the country is still suffering. And nobody seems to be willing to stand up like a human being and say, "My bad." Why not? I think we've got to face that question. What is it about our nation, our culture, our basic outlook on life that keeps this from happening? And what can you graduates do about it as you commence upon your next stage in life, where hopefully you will continue in gainful employment or secure gainful employment and continue on the path to making the world a better place? I think some of it can be traced to the individualism that rests at the heart of our cultural makeup. We're just wired that way. And it is at this very point that more family and community-oriented cultures have something to teach us. I spent a goodly bit of time growing up in Asia and used to take students to China and other parts of the world there. The Chinese are highly communally oriented. The desires and the wishes of the individual are often subsumed under the desires of the family or of the nation. And they have their problems, just like we have ours. But there's certainly something we have to learn from them. We are all part of a web of relationships. It really isn't all about me. It is about you and about the rest of the world. We're part of this web of relationships to the extent that if you use too much water, or you eat too much food, or you spend too much money over on this side of the web, something is going to happen to people over on the other side of the web. My garbage has to go in somebody's backyard. My overindulgence and my tendency towards selfishness means that somebody somewhere isn't getting enough food or their water is contaminated. 1.3 billion people in the world live on $1 a day or less. And that number has increased by 300 million since the economic crisis began. We're in dire need of some humility, of some means whereby we can think a bit more about others than we think about ourselves. And I'd like to offer one simple suggestion to those of you who are graduating today. I don't presume to offer more than that in the hopes that you will remember this one thing. Let me plead with you to recover the lost art of listening. Your own Dr. Shippey here has written a book about it that you all ought to read. It's called Listening in a Loud World. Listen to people around you. Listen to people who are different from you. You never know when you might learn something. A wise man once said, if you're in the company of 3 people, you have at least 1 teacher. You never know when a teacher might show up. And you best be paying attention so that when the teacher appears, you'll be ready to hear what he or she has to say. I learned this lesson when I was a pastor in rural Kentucky.